Book of Heaven, Volume 23, Part 11. January 6, 1928. How the divine will is immense, and in issuing the creatures to the light, it keeps them within itself like many little dwellings. The ingratitude of those who do not let it reign. Harmony between God and man. How he was to receive always from God, in order to give to him always. I was feeling all abandoned in the divine volition. Its light invested me everywhere. And while I was praying my round in its acts, my adorable Jesus moved in my interior and told me, "My daughter, my will is immense, and as it issued the creatures to the light of the day, they remained in my will like many little dwellings formed in it, in which, by right, my volition was to have the regime and the carrying out of its life within each of these little dwellings. But while out of its goodness and generosity it gave the space and everything that was needed in order to form these little dwellings within itself, the creatures, with horrendous ingratitude, did not want to surrender the right to let my divine volition dwell within them. And with so many dwellings it allowed to be formed within itself, for as many as there are creatures, it has the sorrow of remaining without dwellings, because they do not let it enter to dwell within them. It happens to my will as would happen if someone wanted to form many dwellings in the sea or in the light of the sun, and while the sea or the light of the sun give him the space to form these dwellings within them, they did not want to let either the water or the light of the sun have primacy in these dwellings, nor give them the field to dwell and to hold their first place of regime. If the sea and the light had reason, they would feel such sorrow that the sea would invest these dwellings with its waves, and knocking them down, it would undo them and bury them in its bosom, and the light of the sun would burn them to ashes with its heat, so as to get rid of these unworthy and ungrateful dwellings that had denied its entrance. Yet neither the sea nor the sun has given them life, but only space. On the other hand, my will has given life and space within itself to these dwellings of creatures, because there is not one point in which it is not present, nor life that does not come from it. Therefore, the sorrow of my will, because of those who do not let it dominate within themselves, is immense and incalculable. Feeling these lives palpitating within itself, forming their very heartbeat, and remaining outside like a stranger, as if they did not belong to it, is affront and monstrosity from those who do not let it reign, and it is so great that they would deserve life imprisonment and destruction. My daughter, not doing my will seems something trivial to creatures, but it is an evil so great and an ingratitude so awful that there is no evil similar to it. After this, I was continuing my round in the divine Fiat, And as I arrived at the point in which God created man, I thought to myself, why did he rejoice so much in creating him that he did not do with all the other things he created? And my beloved Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, in creating the whole creation with such order and harmony, we gave of our own, and were to receive nothing from it. But in creating man, while giving of our own, we gave him the capacity to give us our very gifts as goods belonging to himself, in such a way that we were to give always. So much so that a contest was to arise between him and us, we in giving, and he in receiving, he in giving to us, and we in lavishing our gifts yet more abundantly upon him. This giving and receiving, receiving and giving, opened the feasts, the games, the joys, the conversation between creator and creature. So, in seeing the littleness of the creature celebrate with our supreme height, amusing itself, rejoicing, conversing with us, we felt such joy, such emphasis of love in creating man, that all other created things seemed nothing to us compared to the creation of man. And if all of them seemed beautiful to us and worthy of our works, and our love ran in all created things, it was because they were to serve us, to abound in gifts toward man, and from him we awaited the requital of love of all created things. Therefore, all our joy and glory was centralized in man, and in creating him, we placed between him and us harmony of intelligence, harmony of light, harmony of words, harmony of works and of steps, and in the heart, harmony of love. So something like many electric wires of harmony passed from us into him, through which we descended into him, and he ascended to us. This is why we rejoiced so much in creating man, and the sorrow he gave us in withdrawing from our will was so great, because he broke all these harmonies, changed our feast into sorrow for us and for himself, destroyed our highest designs, deformed our image that we had created in him. In fact, our divine will alone had the virtue of maintaining our work beautiful, with all the harmonies wanted by us. Once our will is removed, man is the most vile and disagreeable being of all creation. Therefore, my daughter, if you want all your senses to harmonize with us, never go out of my will. If you want to receive always from your Creator and open the feasts with us, let it alone be your life, your all. January 13th, 1928. How God centralized everything in man in creating him, and how, in the history of creation, he now comes back to storm it, and centralizes the first act of creation in one creature from their stock, to form the kingdom of his will. I continue my abandonment in the divine volition, with the almost continuous torment of the privation of my sweet Jesus. Oh God, what terrible pain! Oh, how I miss my past! His sweet smile, his affectionate kisses, the gentleness of his voice, his enchanting and enrapturing beauty, his chaste embraces, his tender heartbeats, that with so much love he let palpitate within mine, divinizing me and transforming his life into myself. Each act of Jesus, each word and each gaze, were as many more paradises that he formed in his little daughter. And now as I remember them, they are wounds, sharp darts, burning arrows of intense sorrow, of martyrdom, and of continuous death. But my sorrow is not all here. Maybe grieving would have been a relief, because my grief would have told me in clear notes that my love toward him whom I loved, and who had loved me so much, formed my torment. But not even this is conceded to me, because as the wounds are about to bleed, the darts to shoot, the arrows to burn me, the light of the holy divine volition flows in them, and eclipsing all the intensity of my hard martyrdom, it makes peace, happiness, beneficial dew flow over my poor soul. So I cannot even have the good of grieving over a loss so great. Oh, if I could grieve as before, I believe that my highest good, Jesus, would not take so long to come back. But this is not in my power. I am at the mercy of the divine Fiat, that leaves not one void in me, and wants to lord even over my sorrow of the privation of Jesus. Now, while I was swimming in the two seas, the sorrow of being without Jesus, and the sea of the light of the divine volition, such that it seemed that one was fused in the other, I continued my round in it, and I paused at the creation of man. And my sweet Jesus, just barely moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, in creating man, our divinity centralized everything in him. And if we had done nothing in all the rest of creation, we put everything aside and occupied ourselves only with him. Our love reached the excess. We looked and looked at him over and over again to see whether he was beautiful, whether our beauty would shine forth in him. Our divine being poured like pouring rain over him. And do you know what it poured? Sanctity, light, wisdom, grace, love, beauty, strength. And while we unloaded ourselves over him, our gazes were fixed upon man, to see whether all our qualities were centralized in him, in such a way that he was to lack nothing in order for us to love him and be loved in return. So much so that his beauty enraptured us, his love invested us. All of our qualities placed in him echoed in our divine being, bound us, and brought us to him. What a solemn time! What an unforgettable point! What ardor of love was the creation of man! All of our divine qualities overflowed outside and celebrated his creation. And as the fulfillment of our feast, joy and happiness, shaken by our own love, we looked at the machine of the whole universe, and we gave him everything as gift, constituting him king of all created things, so as to be able to say, to ourselves and to him, dominating kings are we. King and dominating is the work of our hands, the dear Son, delivered in the outpouring of our love. It would have been unseemly and not decorous for us to make of our Son a servant dissimilar to us in likeness and in dominion. Would it perhaps not be unseemly and unworthy of a king to make of his son a vile servant, putting him out of his royal palace in a poor hovel? This king would deserve the blame of all, and would be held not as father and king, but as a tyrant. Much more so, since our newborn came out from within the depths of our divine love, and therefore we wanted the decorum and the imprint of royalty in our work. Now, this love of ours was broken by man, and by withdrawing from our divine will, he himself removed from himself the imprint of royalty and the insignia of king. However, on our part, nothing changed, and we persisted in our will of making of the work of our hands the Son king, not servant. And therefore, in the whole history of creation, we now come back to storm it, and to the fulfillment of our will, and we call one from their stock, and putting everyone aside, as if no one else existed, we renew the solemnity of the creation of the first man. The ardor of our love forms huge waves, and makes us see everything as love. And placing this creature in the midst of these waves, even though our all-seeingness sees everything, we put everything aside, and with this one we renew the great prodigy of the first act of creation. We did so with the sovereign queen, and since she did not break our love and preserved the life of our will within herself, she has the title and the right of queen. Oh, how our love rejoices and makes feast in seeing in her the first queen of the work of our creative hands. But our love is not content with having only one queen, nor was this our will in creation, and therefore, pouring itself out very strongly and releasing its contained waves, our love calls this creature and centralizes in her the whole work of creation. It pours upon her like pouring rain. It overflows with its divine qualities in order to have the second daughter, Queen, to make her form the foundations of the kingdom of our will, so as to be able to have the retinue of our children, all kings and queens. This is why I am putting everything aside to operate in you the first act of creation. My love forms the enchantment for me, that while I look upon others, it makes me keep my gaze fixed on you, and it makes me pour everything that is needed in order for me to form the kingdom of my will in you. I act like a father who, having provided for his other children to get settled, and having to do so for another one, does not think either about the previous ones, or about those whom he is to fix later, but putting everyone else aside, he thinks only of the one whom he is about to settle. And if this son is good, and he whom he chose is worthy of him, the father does not mind how much he spends. He endows him with greater riches. He prepares a sumptuous house for him. In sum, he puts out all his paternal love. So I do when it comes to realizing the purpose of creation, which is the kingdom of my will in the midst of creatures. For she whom I call to be the first, I hold nothing back. I centralize everything in her, knowing that everything will be inherited by those who will follow her. January 18th, 1928. How the Virgin is isolated in her glory, and how she awaits the cortege of the other queens so as to have her retinue. How the works of God hold hands among themselves. How the manifestations on the divine will shall be the gospel of his kingdom. The issue about the writings. Necessity of the first priests of the kingdom of the Fiat. I was continuing the acts in the divine will, and I said to myself, oh, how I would like to enclose myself in the prime act of God, in order to do everything with one single act, so as to be able to give to my Creator all the love, all the glory, his very beatitudes and infinite joys, to be able to love him and glorify him as he glorifies and loves himself. What would I not give him if I were present in that prime act of the divine Fiat? I would lack nothing to make my Creator happy with his own happiness. And seeing myself impotent, I was praying my sovereign mamma to come to help and to enclose me with her maternal hands in that prime act in which she had had her perennial dwelling, because since she lived in the divine will, the prime act of God was hers, and therefore she could give him whatever she wanted. But while I was thinking about this, I said to myself, how much nonsense I am speaking. But my lovable Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, the Queen of Heaven, in her glory and greatness, is as though isolated. In fact, she alone, having lived in the prime act of God, that is, in the fullness and totality of the divine volition, she is the isolated queen. She does not have the cortege of other queens who surround her and match her in the glory and greatness that she possesses. She finds herself in the conditions of a queen who is surrounded by damsels, by page boys, by faithful friends who give her honor and keep her company. However, no other queen equal to her gives her the great honor of surrounding her and of keeping her company. What would be a greater honor for a queen of the earth? to be surrounded by other queens equal to her, or by people inferior in condition, in glory, in greatness, and in beauty. There is such distance in honor and in glory between one who is surrounded by queens and one who is surrounded only by other people, that no parallel can be compared to it. Now, the celestial Mamma wants, desires, awaits the kingdom of the divine will upon earth, in which there will be the souls who, by living in it, will form their life in the prime act of God, and will acquire the royalty and the right of queens. All will see, impressed in them, an indelible character, that they are the daughters of the divine King, and as daughters, to them is due the title and the right of queens. These souls will have their dwelling in the divine royal palace. Therefore, they will acquire nobility of manners, of works, of steps, of words. They will possess such science that no one will be able to equal them. They will be invested with such light that the light itself will announce to all that here is a queen who has lived in the royal palace of my will. And so the sovereign queen will no longer be alone on her royal throne. She will have the other queens who will surround her. Her beauty will be reflected in them. Her glory and greatness will find the ones in whom it can pour itself. Oh, how honored and glorified she will feel! Therefore, she desires those who want to live in the divine Fiat, in order to herself form the queens in the prime act of it, so as to be able to have, in the celestial fatherland, the retinue of the other queens, who will surround her and will give her the honors due to her. After this I was thinking, what will be the utility of these writings on the divine will? And my highest and only good Jesus, moving in my interior, told me, "My daughter, all of my works hold hands, and this is the sign that they are my works, that one does not oppose the other. On the contrary, they are so bound among themselves that they sustain one another. This is so true that having to form my chosen people, from which and within which the future Messiah was to be born, from that same people I formed the priesthood, that instructed the people and prepared them for the great good of redemption. I gave them laws, manifestations, and inspirations, upon which the sacred scriptures were formed, called the Bible, and all were intent on the study of it. Then, with my coming upon earth, I did not destroy sacred scriptures. On the contrary, I supported them, and my gospel that I announced opposed them in nothing. On the contrary, they sustained each other in an admirable way. And in forming the new nascent church, I formed the new priesthood, that does not detach itself either from sacred scripture or from the gospel. All are intent upon them in order to instruct the peoples. And it can be said that anyone who did not want to draw from this salutary font does not belong to me. because these are the basis of my church and the very life with which the peoples are formed. Now, what I manifest on my divine will, and that you write, can be called the gospel of the kingdom of the divine will. In nothing does it oppose either sacred scriptures or the gospel that I announced while being on earth. On the contrary, it can be called the support of one and of the other. And this is why I allow and I call priests to come to read the gospel, all of heaven, of the kingdom of my divine Fiat, so as to say, as I said to the apostles, preach it throughout the whole world. In fact, in my works, I make use of the priesthood. And just as I had the priesthood before my coming in order to prepare the people, and the priesthood of my church in order to confirm my coming and everything I did and said, so will I have the priesthood of the kingdom of my will. Here is the utility of the many things I have manifested to you, the many surprising truths, the promises of the so many goods that I must give to the children of the Fiat Voluntas Tua. They will be the gospel, the basis, the inexhaustible font from which all will draw the celestial life, the terrestrial happiness, and the restoration of their creation. Oh, how happy they will feel, those who with yearning will drink in large gulps from these fonts of my knowledges, because they contain the virtue of bringing the life of heaven and of banishing any unhappiness. Then, in hearing this, I was thinking to myself about the big issue concerning the writings on the divine will that are in Messina, brought there by the blessed memory of Venerable Father de Francia. How myself and my other superiors absolutely want them here, while the superiors in Messina, rigorously recommended by the Venerable Father before dying, want to keep them over there for their publication when God pleases. So we do nothing but send letters of fire back and forth, them to keep them, and us to get them back. And I was feeling all worried, bored, and tired, and was saying to myself, how could good Jesus allow all this? Who knows whether he too feels disappointed? And he, moving in my interior, told me, my daughter, you are worried, but I am not disappointed at all. On the contrary, I enjoy in seeing the interest that priests take in these writings that will form the kingdom of my will. This means that they appreciate the great good of them, and each one would want to keep such a great treasure with himself, to be the first to communicate it to others. And while the issue of who is going to win lasts, one approaches the other in order to consult one another on what to do. And I enjoy that more of my ministers get to know that there is this treasure so great of making known the kingdom of my divine will. And I use this to form the first priests of my coming kingdom of my Fiat. My daughter, it is a great necessity to form the first priests. They will serve me like the apostles served me to form my church. And the ones who will occupy themselves with these writings in order to publish them, putting them out to print them, to make them known, will be the new evangelists of the kingdom of my supreme will. And just as the ones who are most mentioned in my gospel are the 4 evangelists who wrote it, to their highest honor and my glory, so it will be for those who will occupy themselves with writing the knowledges on my will in order to publish them. Like new evangelists, there will be greater mention of them in the kingdom of my will, to their highest honor and my great glory, in seeing the order of the creature, the life of heaven on earth, the only purpose of creation, return into my bosom. Therefore, in these circumstances, I expand the circle, and like a fisherman, I catch those who must serve me for a kingdom so holy. Therefore, let me do, and do not be worried. You have reached the end of the Book of Heaven, Volume 23, Part 11. Fiat.